The HOA demolished my lake cabin, the one I built with my own hands, as a final promise to my wife. They sent a bulldozer at sunrise, buried her memories in the rubble, and then fined me $28,000 for it. The HOA president just smirked on the local news and said, "The rules apply to everyone." They thought they'd won. They thought I was broken, left with nothing but dirt and a bill. But they forgot to check one tiny little detail: to actually own the land their entire neighborhood was built on. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment. Because this revenge plan is one for the history books. And if you believe no HOA bully should ever get away with this kind of fake power, hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment their world comes crashing down. The last nail went in at sunset. I stood back, my hands raw and my back aching, and looked at the little cabin. It wasn't big, just a single room with a covered porch and a stone chimney I'd laid myself. Every rock pulled from the creek bed that bordered my property. For 18 years, this piece of land had been nothing but woods and a dream. Jenny, my wife, had picked the spot herself, right where the pines gave way to a clear view of the lake. She'd drawn a picture of it on a napkin one night while we were watching TV, a little box with a crooked chimney and smoke curling into a starry sky. She'd said, "That's our forever place, Cal. After all the moving, all the noise, just us and the water. We were supposed to build it together. After I retired from the Navy and she finished her last round of chemo, I ended up building it alone. Every cut of the saw, every swing of the hammer was for her. I could almost hear her laughing when I'd drop a screw or cuss at a board that wasn't straight. When it was finally done, I felt a quiet I hadn't felt in years. It was her legacy, a testament to a promise I'd kept. The first thing I did to make it official was walk down to the dock I'd built last summer and mount a flagpole. I ran a brand new American flag up to the top and watched it snap in the breeze coming off the water. It looked right. It felt right. I was a vet, on my own land, honoring my country and my wife. It was the proudest moment of my life. The next morning, there was a letter slipped under the cabin door. It was from the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. I'd heard of them, of course. They'd formed a few years after I bought my acreage, a bunch of newer folks in the big houses on the other side of the cove who liked rules and matching mailboxes. Since my land was bought and paid for long before they existed, I never paid them much mind. The letter was printed on thick, creamy paper, like it was an invitation to a wedding. It said my flagpole was in violation of Bylaw 7.3, obstruction of scenic view. It informed me I had 48 hours to remove it or face a $100 fine. I read it twice, then crumpled it up and used it to help start the fire in the wood stove. A few days later, a golf cart came rattling down my long gravel driveway. A woman with a sharp haircut and a clipboard stepped out. She wore a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. She didn't smile. "Mr. Winslow?" she said, her voice crisp and annoyed, like I was already a waste of her time. I nodded, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "I'm Karen Dunst, president of the association. You seem to have ignored our friendly notice." I gestured toward the flagpole. "The flag? Ma'am, with all due respect, this is my property. I've owned it for nearly 2 decades. Your association doesn't have a say in what I do on it." She gave a tight, thin-lipped smile. "Our rules ensure the aesthetic harmony of the community. That flagpole detracts from the natural beauty of the lake. It has to come down." I just shook my head. "No, ma'am. It's staying." Her eyes narrowed. "I see." She made a little checkmark on her clipboard. "You'll be hearing from us." And I did. The letters started coming weekly. First, it was the flagpole fine, which had apparently doubled due to non-compliance. Then came a notice that my tool shed was 6 inches too close to my own property line. Another $100 fine. A week after that, a complaint about unauthorized industrial activity. That was me, in my own workshop, doing some welding on a neighbor's tractor hitch. The complaint said the noise was disruptive. The only other house within earshot belonged to a guy who was deaf as a post. Then came the violation for my deck. According to Karen's tape measure, the porch I'd built for Jenny to sit on was 2 inches wider than the approved dimensions in their rulebook. The rulebook they wrote 10 years after I'd bought the land. I finally had enough. I gathered up my deed, my original property survey, and the stack of ridiculous letters and went to their monthly meeting, held in the community clubhouse I'd never once set foot in. I stood up during the public comment section and laid my documents on the table in front of Karen Dunst. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice even, "here is the deed to my property, dated 18 years ago. Here is the survey. As you can see, my ownership predates the formation of this HOA. Your bylaws do not apply to my land." I explained it calmly, respectfully. I was a man of reason. I figured once they saw the facts, laid out in black and white, this nonsense would end. A few people in the room nodded along, looking sympathetic. But Karen didn't even glance at the papers. She just leaned back in her chair, a smug little smirk playing on her lips. She looked at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Mr. Winslow," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity, "it doesn't matter when you bought your land. By choosing to live here, in this community, you implicitly agree to abide by its rules." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air, making sure everyone was watching her put me in my place. "You signed," she said slowly, tapping her pen on the table for emphasis, "by living here." The room went quiet. I just stood there, staring at her, the papers on the table suddenly feeling worthless. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about views or noise or deck sizes. It was about power. And in her small, sad little world, she had all of it. I picked up my documents and walked out without another word. I knew then that this wasn't going to end with a conversation. This was a war. I just had no idea how far she was willing to go to win it. The smell hit me first. Diesel fuel and freshly turned earth. It was still dark. The sun just a faint gray promise on the horizon. I pulled my truck up the gravel drive, and my headlights washed over a scene of total devastation. Where my cabin had stood just the day before, there was now a mangled pile of splintered wood, twisted metal roofing, and shattered glass. It was gone. Not damaged, not half torn down. It was flattened, scraped clean down to the dirt foundation I had poured with my own 2 hands. A single yellow bulldozer was parked off to the side, its metal claw caked with the guts of my life's work. I stumbled out of my truck, my legs feeling like they didn't belong to me. The flagpole was bent in half, the flag itself ripped and tangled in a heap of rubble. I walked through the wreckage, numb. The porch swing I'd hung for Jenny, gone. The stone chimney I'd built, a pile of rocks. My welding gear, the tools I'd inherited from my father, my generator, all of it was buried or broken, crushed under the weight of my own home. And then I saw it. A small wooden box, splintered open. Inside, covered in dust and debris, was the photo album Jenny had put together of our life. The pictures were torn, the pages bent. That's when the rage hit me, hot and blinding. I kicked a piece of twisted siding, a useless gesture that sent a sharp pain up my leg, but did nothing to ease the fire in my chest. A formal notice was taped to a temporary fence post they'd erected. It was from the HOA. The demolition was authorized under an emergency provision, citing an unapproved structure over setback limits. It was a violation, they claimed, that posed a potential hazard. There was another piece of paper with it, an invoice. They had charged my account, the account I never even knew I had, for the cost of the demolition, $28,000. They had destroyed my home, obliterated a shrine to my late wife, and then sent me the bill. Later that day, a local news van showed up. They'd been tipped off, probably by Karen herself. She stood there in front of the wreckage, her face a mask of concerned authority. She told the reporter, a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, that it was a regrettable but necessary action. The rules are in place to protect the community's integrity and safety. Karen said, her voice smooth and practiced. It's unfortunate when a resident refuses to comply, but the rules apply to everyone. We simply can't make exceptions. I watched the interview later on my phone, sitting in the cab of my truck, parked where my living room used to be. She was playing the victim, making it sound like I was the problem, the rogue element who had forced her hand. I saw a comment scroll by under the online video. Good for the HOA. Bet he was a real troublemaker. My hands started shaking. I wanted to scream, to drive my truck right through that stupid clubhouse, but I just sat there, the screen glowing in the dark. That night, I slept in my truck. And the next night. And the night after that, I was a 62-year-old veteran, sleeping in my pickup on a plot of land I owned, surrounded by the ruins of my own life. I filed a complaint with the county. They sent back a form letter saying it was a civil matter. I called a lawyer, who told me I could sue, but it would take years and cost a fortune I didn't have, especially with a $28,000 lien now attached to my property. I was powerless, trapped. That's exactly what Karen Dunst wanted. She had taken everything, and she had done it with a pen and a clipboard. She had used the law like a club, and I was the one left bleeding. For 2 weeks, I did nothing but sift through the debris, trying to salvage what I could. I found a few of Jenny's old gardening tools, bent but repairable. I found a single unbroken coffee mug with her initial on it. Every salvaged piece was like a fresh stab in the heart. One afternoon, sitting on my tailgate and eating a cold can of beans, I was staring at the pile of official notices from the HOA, the ones I had initially ignored. I started reading through the dense packet of bylaws they had sent me after the demolition, the one that supposedly justified everything. It was page after page of legalese and nonsense about fence heights and lawn maintenance. My eyes were glazing over. But then I got to a section about common areas, the roads, the boat launch, the mailboxes. It mentioned a lease agreement for the land these things sat on. That was weird. Why would they lease the land for their own roads? Out of sheer idle curiosity, I drove to the county clerk's office. I spent 4 hours digging through property records, tax maps, and incorporation documents. And that's when I found it. The Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association didn't own the roads. They didn't own the land under the clubhouse. They didn't own the neat little strip of grass by the entrance with their fancy sign. All of it, every square inch of their infrastructure, was sitting on land owned by a faceless holding company out of the city. A holding company that leased it to them on a 5-year contract. And that contract was set to expire in 60 days. I stood there in the dusty basement of the county records building, a single sheet of paper trembling in my hand. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. The grief was still there, a dull, constant ache. But it was being replaced by something else, something sharp and clear and cold as steel. Karen Dunst and her little club had torn down my life because they thought they owned everything. They were about to find out they owned nothing at all. I folded the paper, slid it into my pocket, and walked out into the sunlight. If they wanted to play legal games, I'll play one they won't walk away from. My first call was to my brother-in-law, Dana. He's a real estate attorney, the kind of guy who can read 100 pages of legal jargon and spot the one sentence that matters. I told him what I'd found. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Cal," he said finally, his voice a low hum of professional curiosity, "are you telling me their entire infrastructure is built on leased land?" "Every road, every mailbox, the dock, and that fancy clubhouse," I confirmed. "And the lease is up for renewal in 2 months." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He asked for the name of the holding company. I read it off the document. Gable Equity Partners, LLC. He told me to sit tight. An hour later, he called back. "They're a ghost," he said. "It's a shell company. They own a handful of oddball parcels like this all over the state. No employees, just a registered agent and a P.O. box. My guess is it's just a name on a spreadsheet to them." They probably inherited these plots in a larger portfolio and are just collecting the checks until someone makes them an offer. My heart started to beat a little faster. So we make an offer, I said. Not we, Dana corrected. Me. On behalf of an anonymous client. Your name can't be anywhere near this, Cal. If they get a whiff that a disgruntled homeowner is trying to buy the land out from under the HOA, they'll either jack up the price or report it to Karen just to stir the pot. He was right. This had to be quiet. A clean, simple transaction between two corporate entities. He asked me how much I had. I told him. Between my Navy pension, my savings, and what Jenny had left me, I could make a respectable offer. It would gut me financially, but some things are worth more than money. All right, Dana said. Let me make some calls. Don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just keep your head down. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I continued to sleep in my truck, listening to the night sounds of the lake, my mind racing. Every time a car came down my driveway, I expected it to be Karen with another violation notice. Dana's offer went in through an LLC he created for the purpose, something with a boring name that wouldn't raise any flags. The holding company countered. We countered back. The silence was deafening. I spent my days cleaning up the last of the wreckage, piling usable lumber to one side, hauling twisted metal to the scrapyard. It was a slow, painful process, like presiding over a funeral that never ended. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dana. "Congratulations, Cal," he said, his voice flat and professional, but I could hear the smile in it. "As of 10 o'clock this morning, you are the proud owner of every road, sidewalk, and common area in Lakeside Meadows." I sat down hard on the tailgate of my truck. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was the first breath that didn't feel like it was laced with grief and rage. It was a breath of cold, clear purpose. The power had shifted. The board had changed. And they didn't even know they were playing a new game. I waited a week. I wanted them to feel secure, to think I had been beaten, that I had accepted my fate as the guy in the truck living in his own dirt pile. Then I went to my workshop and pulled out my old surveying equipment. The next morning, I set up a transit on a tripod right in the middle of Lakeside Drive, the main road leading into the neighborhood. I spent the day there, making a big show of looking through the eyepiece, jotting notes on a pad, and driving wooden stakes with bright orange plastic flags into the manicured grass on either side of the road. People slowed down as they drove by, staring. A few neighbors I knew waved hesitantly, and I just gave them a polite nod. I was just a man, doing a job. Around noon, the golf cart came bouncing down the road. Karen Dunst pulled up, her face a thundercloud. A man I recognized from the HOA meetings, a wannabe cop named Dave, sat beside her, arms crossed over his tactical vest. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, getting out of the cart and marching toward me. Her voice was sharp, a weapon she was used to wielding with great effect. "You can't just set up equipment in the middle of our road." I looked up from my transit, feigning mild surprise. "Morning, Karen," I said calmly. "Just doing a little survey work." "A survey of what?" "This is HOA property," she snapped. I gave her a slow, easy smile. "Well now, that's the interesting thing. I'm just confirming some property lines. Making sure I know exactly where my land begins and where it ends." Her face went blank with confusion for a second, then hardened again. She thought I was playing a game, trying to find a loophole with my own property line. She had no bigger picture. "This is unauthorized activity," she declared, pointing a finger at my tripod. "You are obstructing traffic and damaging HOA property with these stakes. You'll be receiving a fine for this. A significant one." She gestured for Dave to start taking pictures with his phone as evidence. I just shrugged and went back to looking through my eyepiece. "You do what you have to do, Karen," I said, not looking at her. "I'm not building anything. I'm just measuring what's mine." They stood there for another minute, fuming, but there was nothing they could do. I wasn't being hostile. I wasn't breaking any visible rule they could enforce on the spot. I was just a man with a tripod, utterly baffling to them, and completely within my rights. They finally got back in their golf cart and sped off toward the clubhouse. The next day, a notice was taped to my truck window. A $500 fine for unauthorized land use and community disruption. I took it down, walked over to my workshop, and pinned it to the wall right next to the demolition invoice. It was a start. The collection was growing. Owning the roads was phase 1. It was a strategic hold. A loaded gun they didn't know was pointed at them. Phase 2 was about dismantling their arsenal. The image of that bulldozer, its blade smeared with the remnants of my cabin, was burned into my mind. I needed to find the man who'd been behind the controls. The demolition company's name was on the invoice Karen had so thoughtfully provided. Miller & Sons Earthworks. I found their number and called. A gruff voice answered. I asked to speak to Mr. Miller. The voice on the phone sighed. Which one? Old Man Miller, or one of his useless boys? I ended up talking to the son, a guy named Rick, who sounded tired and overworked. I told him I wanted to talk about the job they did at Lakeside Meadows. His tone immediately soured. Look, pal, if you're another one of them HOA folks calling to complain, you can save your breath. The job is done. Your crazy president lady already shorted us on the final payment. That got my attention. What do you mean, she shorted you? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Rick let out a bitter laugh. The quote was 35 grand. After the job was done, she comes back with some punch list of non-compliance issues. Said we left ruts in the grass or some crap. Knocked $7,000 off the final invoice. Said it was in the contract. We either took it or we could sue, and she knew we couldn't afford a legal fight with a fancy HOA. A cold smile spread across my face. Karen's penny-pinching arrogance was her weakness. She thought everyone was as powerless as she wanted them to be. Rick, I said, I'm the owner of the cabin you tore down, and I'd like to make you an offer. We met at a diner halfway between the lake and his office. I laid it out for him. I told him Karen had no right to demolish my cabin, and that she'd stiffed him just like she was trying to stiff me. I'll pay you the $7,000 she owes you, I said, sliding a cashier's check across the sticky tabletop. In cash. Today. He stared at the check, then at me. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. What's the catch? He asked. No catch. I said, I just need you to do something for me. I want to see the contract you signed with the HOA. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled a crumpled document from his truck's glove compartment. I spread it out on the table. Most of it was standard boilerplate, but I was looking for one thing, and there it was, in the fine print. Dana had taught me to always read the fine print. It was a standard clause, something contractors put in to protect themselves. It gave Miller & Sons the right of first refusal on any future demolition or earth-moving projects within the Lakeside Meadows community. It meant if the HOA wanted to tear something else down, they had to offer the job to Rick's company first. If he refused, only then could they hire someone else. Karen probably hadn't even read it. She was too focused on her power, not the details. I want to buy this contract from you, Rick, I said. I'll give you another $5,000 for it. You sign the rights over to an LLC I control. You get paid in full. You wash your hands of that HOA forever, and you never have to deal with Karen Dunst again. He looked from the check to my face, a slow grin spreading across his own. Mister, he said, picking up the check, you've got yourself a deal. A week later, I saw my opening. A family down the road, the Garcias, had been in a running battle with Karen over a 6-foot privacy fence they'd put up for their dog. Karen claimed it was too high. The Garcias, a young couple with 2 small kids, were terrified. They'd already received thousands in fines they couldn't pay. On Tuesday morning, a notice went up on their door. The fence was scheduled for demolition on Friday. I saw Mrs. Garcia standing in her yard, crying, as Karen's sidekick, Louise, took pictures with her clipboard. I waited until they were gone, then walked over. I introduced myself and explained that I might be able to help. She looked at me, her eyes filled with despair, and said they were thinking of just selling the house. They couldn't take the harassment anymore. Don't sell anything yet. I told her, just wait until Friday. On Friday morning, a different crew showed up, not Miller and Sons. Karen was there, directing them, a triumphant look on her face. As they were unloading their equipment, I walked over, holding a piece of paper. "Morning, Karen," I said cheerfully. "Looks like you hired a new crew," she sneered. Mr. Miller's company was unavailable. "We're well within our rights." I held up the paper. "This is a legally executed transfer of contract," I said, my voice loud enough for the new crew to hear. "The right of first refusal for demolition work in this community now belongs to a company I control, and we are formally refusing this job." I turned to the foreman of the new crew. "Which means if you touch that fence, you and your company will be in breach of a binding agreement and liable for damages. I suggest you pack up your tools and send your bill to the HOA for your time." The foreman looked at Karen, then at the legal document in my hand, then back at Karen. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew trouble when he saw it. He shrugged. "Sorry, ma'am, we're not getting in the middle of this." He and his crew started packing up. Karen's face went from smug to purple. She started sputtering about bylaws and authority, but her words were empty. The Garcias were watching from their porch, their jaws on the floor. "Mr." Garcia gave me a slow nod, a look of dawning comprehension in his eyes. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows started to drift outside, whispering to each other. The tide was turning. They could see a crack in Karen's armor. For the first time since the HOA was formed, someone had stood up to her and won. And as Karen stood there, helpless and fuming in the middle of the street, I knew this was just the beginning. I had taken away her bulldozer. Now, I was going to take away her army. The story of the Garcia's fence spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People started talking, quietly at first, then more openly. I'd be out checking my survey stakes and a car would slow down, the driver giving me a thumbs up. Mr. Garcia stopped by with a six-pack of beer and a handshake that spoke volumes. He told me about others. An elderly woman fined for having a bird bath, Karen deemed gaudy. A family cited for their kid's basketball hoop. A retired teacher forced to rip out her prize-winning rose bushes because they weren't on the approved plant list. Each story was a fresh log on the fire, burning in my gut. These weren't just rules. They were weapons of petty tyranny, and Karen wielded them with joy. For the next few weeks, I became a quiet collector of stories and a documentarian of abuses. People started slipping notes under my truck's windshield wiper, detailing their own battles with the HOA, complete with dates, fine amounts, and grainy photos of the alleged violations. The fear that had kept them silent for years was slowly being replaced by a shared sense of indignation. They just needed a leader, someone to stand in the line of fire first. I was already living in a dirt pile. I had nothing left to lose. I let the pressure build. I continued my surveying, a constant, silent reminder that I was there, measuring, watching. The monthly HOA meeting was coming up, and I knew it was time. Time to stop playing defense and launch a full frontal assault. The clubhouse meeting room was packed. Word had gotten out that I might be speaking, and people who hadn't attended a meeting in years were crowded in the back, standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension. Karen and her board sat at a long table at the front, looking smug and unbothered, as if this was just another Tuesday. They droned through their usual business, treasurer's report, landscaping committee update. Then they opened the floor for homeowner comments. Before anyone else could stand, I was on my feet, walking to the microphone set up in the aisle. Karen's eyes locked onto mine, a flicker of annoyance in them. "Mr. Winslow, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You'll have 3 minutes. Please try to be concise." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch, looking out at the faces in the crowd. The Garcias, the woman with the bird bath, the teacher who lost her roses. They were all looking at me, a mixture of hope and fear in their eyes. "My name is Cal Winslow," I said, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the microphone. "Most of you know what happened to my cabin. You know about the fines. What you don't know is what I've been doing for the last month." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I've been buying land." A confused murmur rippled through the room. Karen shifted in her seat, her condescending smile faltering slightly. "Specifically," I continued, "I've been buying the land your homes don't sit on. As of 4 weeks ago, my company became the legal owner of the parcel that contains every road, every cul-de-sac, the boat launch, the mail kiosk, and the very ground this clubhouse is built on." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the cheap linoleum floor. I had their full attention. Karen stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining from her face. She looked like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "In short," I said, leaning into the microphone, "you've all been trespassing for weeks, but I'm a reasonable man. I've decided to overlook it, for now." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "But that changes next week. My attorney will be issuing formal trespass notices to every resident and to the HOA board. Access to your homes via my roads will be terminated, unless we can agree to some significant changes around here." Karen finally found her voice. It came out as a strangled scoff. That's absurd. You're bluffing. You can't do that," she sputtered, her composure cracking. "Can't I?" I walked to the front and laid the documents on the table in front of her, one by one. "Here is the certified deed of sale. Here is the title history for Parcel 7B, dating back to 1952. Here is the expired lease agreement between Gable Equity Partners and the Lakeside Meadows HOA. And here," I said, unrolling a large surveyor's map and spreading it across the table, "is a map of my property, highlighted in yellow. As you can see, you are all on it." A wave of noise erupted from the back of the room. It started as a few claps, then grew into a full-blown roar of applause. People were on their feet, cheering. Mr. Garcia was pumping his fist in the air. The power in the room had shifted so fast, it was like a physical blow. Karen, looking utterly stunned, grabbed her gavel and started banging it furiously on the table. "Order! Order! This meeting is not a stage for this man's lunatic fantasies!" she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. I held up my hand, and the room quieted. I hadn't moved. I wasn't yelling. "I'm not finished," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. I turned to face her directly. "I've been reading your bylaws, Karen, the ones you love so much, and I found a very interesting little rule. Bylaw 3.4c. It states that any landowner within the association, which, as the owner of all this common land, I now am, is entitled to call for a special vote of no confidence in the current leadership." The room exploded. Chants of "Vote! Vote! Vote!" started up, echoing off the walls. Karen's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She banged the gavel again and again, but no one was listening to her anymore. The meeting devolved into chaos. Karen and her board huddled together, their faces pale with shock, as their neighbors, their victims, openly defied them. A local news reporter, who'd been tipped off by a friend of a friend, was waiting outside, camera rolling. The headline the next morning read, "Homeowner turned landlord sparks HOA revolt after cabin demolished." The war was out in the open now. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to give up. She'd been publicly humiliated, stripped of her authority in front of the entire community. This wasn't over. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, and I had just backed her into a very small corner. The vote of no confidence was scheduled, but Karen wasn't going to go down quietly. She went from bully to cornered rat overnight. Her tactics shifted from official notices to something dirtier, more personal. She started a smear campaign. Flyers appeared on mailboxes, professionally printed and anonymous, of course. They called me a predatory developer and claimed I was planning to bulldoze the clubhouse to build condos. They said I was a disgruntled ex-resident with a vendetta who was endangering the community. It was desperate and pathetic, but it scared some of the older residents. Fear was the only tool she had left. I ignored the flyers. I knew responding would only legitimize her lies. Instead, I focused on solidifying my position. Through Dana, I quietly purchased 2 more small, overlooked parcels of land that the same holding company owned. One was a small strip of grass next to the community boat dock, and the other was the land directly under the communal mail station. They were small, almost worthless plots to anyone else, but to me, they were strategic assets. Control the access, control everything. A few days after the flyer incident, I noticed my water tasted funny. I get my water from a private well on my property, and it had always been clean and cold. Now it had a faint, bitter, chemical taste to it. I stopped drinking it immediately and switched to bottled water. My first thought was a failing pump or a natural contamination, but a deep, cold suspicion began to grow in my gut. I took a sample and drove it to a private lab in the city. The next day, the lab tech called me back. "Mr. Winslow," he said, his voice grim, "you need to call the police. We found traces of ethylene glycol in your water sample. That's the primary ingredient in antifreeze." The world swam for a moment. Someone had tried to poison my well. Someone had crept onto my land in the dead of night and poured poison into the water I drank, bathed in, lived on. The rage I felt was so cold and pure it was almost calming. This had crossed a line. This wasn't about bylaws and property lines anymore. This was a direct threat to my life. I called the sheriff's department. A deputy came out, took a report, looked around, and told me that without any witnesses or evidence, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested I install security cameras. He was right. That night, I called my old Navy buddy Smoke. I told him what happened. He didn't say much, just, "I'll be there in the morning." The next day, Smoke pulled up in his rust bucket flatbed, loaded with high-end, motion-activated, night vision security cameras. They were military surplus, the kind you couldn't buy at a big box store. "Figured you could use these," he grunted, unloading them. We spent the day wiring them up, placing them in discreet locations overlooking the well pump, my driveway, and the perimeter of my property. I also called my neighbor, a retired fire chief named Bill. I told him what happened. He didn't even flinch. He just nodded and said he'd had his own run-ins with Karen's unhinged behavior. That evening, he came over and helped me install a bank of motion sensor floodlights. My property was now lit up like a prison yard, if so much as a squirrel passed through. 2 nights later, at 3 a.m., the world outside my truck exploded with light. The floodlights had been tripped. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed the small tablet Smoke had synced to the cameras and saw a figure, bundled in a dark hoodie, creeping near my trailer. They were holding a camera, taking pictures. They froze like a deer in headlights when the lights came on, then turned and fled back toward the road. The angle wasn't perfect, but the camera caught a clear shot of their face as they looked back in panic. It was Karen Dunst. She wasn't wearing a mask. Her arrogance had made her sloppy. I saved the footage. I didn't call the police. Not yet. The vote was 2 days away, and I knew she was desperate for anything she could use against me. Pictures of the squalor I was living in, proof that I was a danger to the community. She had handed me the ammunition I needed to end this once and for all. I bided my time. The day of the vote, I was out by my truck when I saw her coming down the driveway again. This time it was broad daylight. She was walking with Louise, her clipboard-wielding crony. They were marching toward my trailer, their faces set in grim determination. "Mr. Winslow," Karen called out, her voice filled with feigned authority. We are here to conduct a formal site inspection as per bylaw 14.4. I just stood there, my arms crossed, and waited for her to get closer. You're trespassing, Karen, I said, my voice quiet. This is a pre-demolition inspection, she snapped back, trying to regain control. Your living conditions are a clear violation. You mean like this? I interrupted, holding up my phone and playing the video from 2 nights before. Her face, illuminated by the floodlights, filled the screen. Her eyes widened in horror. Louise froze mid-step, her clipboard forgotten. The color drained from Karen's face. She stared at the phone, speechless. This time, I didn't wait. I made 2 calls. The first was to the local news reporter who had covered the last meeting. The second was to the sheriff. The reporter got there first. And as Karen Dunst stood there, trapped in my driveway, trying desperately to explain that she was the victim, that I was harassing her, the sheriff's patrol car pulled in behind her, blocking her only exit. The deputy stepped out, looked at the video on my phone, listened to my statement about the well, and then walked calmly over to Karen. He asked her a few questions. Her answers became more and more frantic, a jumble of HOA bylaws and accusations. Finally, he just shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest." The reporter's camera zoomed in as the deputy clicked the cuffs around her wrists. Karen started screaming, a wild, unhinged sound, shouting about rules and compliance and her authority as the president, while neighbors, drawn by the commotion, stood in their yards, filming the whole thing on their phones. It was over. The Queen had been dethroned, not in a stuffy meeting room, but in handcuffs, on my land, for the whole world to see. With Karen Dunst facing charges for criminal trespass and felony water tampering, the HOA crumbled like a rotten log. The emergency meeting for the no-confidence vote turned into a mass resignation. Her board members, stripped of their leader, practically ran from the clubhouse, not wanting to be associated with the disaster. Within a month, the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association was legally dissolved. The lawsuits against them, from me and a half-dozen other families Karen had terrorized over the years, piled up. Unable to pay its legal fees, or the settlements, the HOA's only real asset, the clubhouse building itself, went up for county auction. I was the only bidder. I bought it for pennies on the dollar, not because I wanted it, but because of what it represented. It was the throne room from which Karen had ruled her petty kingdom, and I wanted to make sure no one like her ever sat in that chair again. 2 months later, on a sunny Saturday, I sent out an invitation to every house in the neighborhood. It wasn't on fancy cream paper. It was a simple flyer I printed myself, inviting everyone to a community barbecue and Liberation Day party. I held it on the lawn, in front of the now-defunct clubhouse. I rolled out my big grill, and smoke came over with a truckload of ribs and brisket. The Garcias brought salads. The teacher whose roses had been destroyed brought a homemade pie. It was a potluck, a real one, where neighbors who had been afraid to talk to each other for years were now laughing, sharing food, and introducing their kids. After everyone had eaten, I stood up on the clubhouse steps. The conversations died down. Everyone looked at me. I don't have a big speech. I started, looking out at the faces of my neighbors. I just wanted to say welcome. Welcome to a community without ridiculous rules and busybody inspectors. As of today, the HOA is officially a thing of the past. A huge cheer went up. People were hugging each other. A few of the older folks were actually crying. "You're all free," I continued. "You own your homes. You can paint your doors whatever color you want. You can put up a basketball hoop for your kids. Just try not to be jerks to each other." A wave of laughter rolled through the crowd. "There's just one new rule," I said, a smile on my face. "As the guy who now owns all the roads, I reserve the right to ban anyone from using them if they're caught harassing their neighbors. We're a community, not a compliance checklist. Let's start acting like one." The applause was deafening. Later, I found out Karen Dunst took a plea deal. She paid a $40,000 fine and got 5 years of probation. The civil suits wiped out her savings. She sold her house at a loss and moved away, disappearing into the obscurity she so richly deserved. The following spring, a different kind of construction started on my property. It wasn't just me this time. Every weekend, neighbors would show up. Mr. Garcia, who was a carpenter by trade, helped me frame up the new cabin. Bill, the retired fire chief, wired the whole place for me. The ladies from down the street came with flats of flowers and planted a garden where the bulldozer tracks had been. Smoke brought over his heavy-duty welder and helped me fabricate a new flagpole, one that was taller and stronger than the first. We built the cabin bigger this time, with a guest room and a screened-in porch. It was no longer just a monument to a memory. It was a testament to a community that had found its strength. When it was finished, we all gathered at the dock. I unveiled a small bronze plaque that Smoke and I had made. We mounted it on the side of the dock, overlooking the water. Jenny's Landing, it read, in honor of my late wife. Below that, I'd added another line. For every vet who built something beautiful and was told they weren't allowed to keep it. As I stood there, watching the sun set over the lake, surrounded by friends and neighbors, I realized the truth. Karen had taken my cabin, but in the end, she'd given me something far more valuable. She'd given me a mission. I had started this fight seeking revenge, a way to settle a score, but it had turned into something else. It was about restoration, about rebuilding, not just a structure, but the very idea of what a neighborhood should be. It turns out, the best power move isn't revenge. It's building something they can never tear down again.